Welcome back to episode 6 of Building Skills, Paving Pathways, a podcast series brought to you by NTU's CAO office, which features notable alumni, their experiences, and skills they develop in their career progress. In this episode, to share on the skills of communication and collaboration, we have a senior project controller at Mott MacDonald. It is an engineering consultancy firm, Jacon Ong. Hi, Jacon.
Nice to meet you.
Before we go into the skills, right, maybe I'll just ask your experience, I guess, in NTU. How were you like as a student? What was your focus?
Okay, so for one, I think NTU was quite an enriching experience for me. So I participated in Hall. I went for an overseas exchange in Europe. And also I did 3 internships during my time in NTU.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so the reason why I actually did so many internships is because I wanted to understand the industry more. There's different aspects of the industry as well. So I decided that for each of the summer breaks, I need to kind of like understand more so that I make the right choice when I graduate.
Got it. So that's an intentional decision.
Yep.
Were you as active in hall staff and everything, or not so much? Mostly studies and enough content already for your time?
Yeah, it's because the internship comes during summer break where it's after the studying and the hall activity. So yeah, I think it's a balanced mix of all.
Okay. Yeah. Do you think school prepared you for your work?
So I think they do in a way. So for me, I took a module called Leadership in 21st Century. I think that was a business elective, elective that I did that actually highlights the difference between the Western and Eastern culture of working and the leadership styles and principle. I thought it was quite useful because you can see it firsthand at work when you deal with the Western. So my company is actually a London-based company. So a lot of the management team are from the Western part of the world. At the same time, our client is mainly Asians. So what you have is actually a mix of both cultures. So even the modules that you learn, you start to realize, these are stuff that the prof actually talked about before, and we can actually kind of understand and quickly understand why people are acting the way they do.
Yeah, that's a module I consider taking as well. But also at the same time, I think you mentioned offline that it's a good foundation, but a lot of the skills you develop only on the job, right? And only on actually doing it. But I'm curious about your case in a more technical degree like engineering. How much of it is relevant in the workforce?
Okay, so I graduated from with a degree in civil engineering. Yeah. So when I first joined Mott, I'm actually a design engineer. So a lot of the tasks that we do it's actually the foundation of what we learn in school. So for example, we need to design an overhead bridge, for example. So you kind of need to know your steel structures that you learn in school. Of course, in school, what we learn is the theory, the calculations, how to do the hand calculations to design one part of it. But when you go into a job, you realize that you don't really have the time to do your hand calculation. There's software out there, there's technology to help you. But which is, you need to do your own side calculation as well to make sure that whatever that the computer outputs is actually accurate or valid. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Okay, I just want to give a brief background before going to the... I go jump straight into the skills, but I think now we're going to talk about something more universal, which is communication, collaboration. Any industry will require it. And as a project manager, you had to deal with a lot of people at any one point of time. What does communication mean to you?
So I think in essence, communication for me is like whatever that I picture in my brain, when I convey it, that same image in my brain should be the same image that's portrayed in someone else's brain that I'm communicating to.
Okay.
Yep. So a red apple is a red apple. It doesn't become a green apple when it reaches someone's...
Sure.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the thing that I go to schools and do programs. It reminds me of the activity we do, right, where one person says something, then they translate the message, and it's almost never exactly the same.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, but it does show a reality, which is communication is, like you said, it's imperfect. It's fidelity, where how accurate your message being portrayed is being received by the other person. And that is never 100% because we have our own filters and bias. There is noise in the environment, and the other person also has their own filters. So you can never be 100%, but we try our best to turn it to 100%. I think that is good communication. how important is that for you? In your work and even as a student initially.
So for work-wise, I think for us, back when I was a design engineer, so whatever that we need to, so we design, like for example, we design a steel structure, for example, we need to accurately mark out the drawings, or we need to communicate directly to our drafters or technician who will be doing the final drawing on AutoCAD. Yep. So if we don't communicate properly, then they would actually not draw out the exact drawing that you need. And then when you check, you realize there's an error, there'll be a back and forth process. It's inefficient, and at the same time, there's a risk that you might actually, the contractor might build something wrongly. So it's really important that the communication is done right. Yeah. That's for work. So as a student, a lot of time, again, back to all of this, our student life, I think a lot of this communication is very critical during our projects, when we are doing group projects, because I've been hearing stories about how teams are actually fighting, they are not agreeing to a common consensus, or some teammates they feel that they're doing a lot more than what their other teammates are doing. So I think if you communicate clearly and properly at the start and give everyone like we delegate a task properly, I think a lot of this kind of fight and unhappiness wouldn't have happened. And the project would be smoother. Actually.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to discuss solutions to that soon.
Okay.
Right. In fact, we're going to go into it now. What are some barriers to good communication?
Firstly, I think it's the way we are brought up. I think there's a lot of assumptions. When we communicate, we assume that everyone know what we think.
Yeah.
But then different people have different views on different things. So if I say an apple is red, that's my assumption that the apple is red. But to someone else, the apple might be actually green. So we cannot assume that everyone knows what the color of the apple that we are talking about. So I guess it's also to clarify whenever you are unsure. I think that's very, very important to actually clarify and to kind of ask the questions before you deep dive into something and realize that actually it was not what the other person assumed it to be.
Yeah. Assumptions are interesting. I think the word itself is an assume, right? It's making an ass out of you and me, right? If you assume something. It sometimes happens. But how do people check their blind spots? Knowing that so many assumptions are not even conscious.
So I think for me, it's more about being upfront, and I guess you cannot assume. I don't like to use the word assume, but I've been using it. So you cannot assume that the other party has the same thinking as you. I think it's better to speak a bit more, spend a bit more time laying down all the facts. Yeah. So and that would prevent all of this kind of miscommunication from happening.
And what about reacting? I thought it was good to discuss this. I feel like one barrier of communication is being very reactive, like taking things personally. And do you find that relevant in some of the things?
So I think that also comes from the difference in mindset from the different culture as well. So as Asian, I think we tend to take whatever people say quite personally. And also I think there's something about us being a high context kind of culture where we actually, when you want to say deliver bad news for Asians, you always have to say all the good stuff and cushion the bad news, then you deliver the bad news. But if you're looking at the Western culture, they're actually quite low context. They will just, if there's a bad news, they'll just deliver it. Hey, this is the bad news, and just deliver it straight. And more often than not, the counterpart, the Westerners, they will take it at face value. So they will just they won't take it personally. They'll just try to problem solve. But for Asian, there's a reason why we need to cushion the bad news, because sometimes they'll start to overthink and they'll take all of this personally.
Fascinating. I haven't really worked in an environment with many foreigners, so I wouldn't know. But I tend to agree with that part about the Asians. Again, everything is obviously exists on a spectrum, but it's good that you highlight it. Let's talk about the flip side, right? What makes for good communication?
To be a good communicator, I think the first thing is you need to be a good listener as well. You need to understand the verbal cues, the non-verbal cues of whoever you're talking. So I think as you communicate, you kind of have a feel of how the other party is reacting. Are they even understanding you? Are you on the same page? If you're not, then maybe it's time to maybe take a pause and ask the other party to kind of read back to you what you just said, so that you make sure that all the assumptions are actually like cleared and everyone is on the same page. I think more often than not, what we do is it's like a machine gun. We'll just just keep going on and on.
Sometimes
and
I
on
do that
and
a
on.
lot because I'm a fast-paced person. So I do a lot with a lot of people. Sometimes I piss people off. Okay, yeah.
So I mean, it's there's no right or wrong lah. End of the day, if you do it very fast and the other person catch all of it and whatever that is in your mind is in their mind now, then I think that's all right as well.
Right, yeah. But I'm making the assumption that someone can catch it as fast as me. Then I realize that it's not the case all the time lah. And it's good to actually, like you said, pause and ask them to check back with you or rephrase back to you, because I think sometimes even Asians, right, we're afraid to like speak up. Yep. So even they don't get anything, they just nod. Then okay, I get it. And then after that, a lot of things in between is like, not exactly the way like you said the fidelity is not. But how do you like check in on their non-verbals? What are some things you observed, especially working now as a leader as well in your own organization? What are some things you observe in people that ensures that they're listening or picking up stuff?
Okay, so I mean, one of the non-verbal cues I have is when people keep quiet.
Okay.
So keeping quiet might not be actually a good thing because you don't really know whether they know or they don't know.
Okay.
So normally what I'll do is I'll actually reach out to them with their name. I mean, if it's a Zoom call because of COVID, right? Yeah. So some of them don't turn on their webcam, so you don't even know whether they are there or not. So normally what I'll do is I'll pause and I'll just call out their name and say, is it okay? Do you get what I'm saying? Or I'll just ask a question. Yeah. Actually, quite a lot of my presentation, I actually give polls to people to engage them and to kind of hear people's opinion. So when you get people to think, then you know that even through answering you, whether do they really understand what you actually said, or are they thinking of a different track? Then if that happens, then you know that communication is lost somewhere. Then you can actually re-emphasize your point or say it in a different way so that people actually understand what you're trying to say.
And also another thing to note is that there are three aspects of communication, right? There is verbal, is what we speak. Visual, which is how we look at our non-verbals, eye contact, gestures. And then we have our vocal, which is how we use our voice, right? The typical pitch, pace, pausing. So it's not a communications class, but if it fascinates you, you all can go look more into it. It's on Google. There are many, many podcast resources out there. Yeah, but this is really hopefully to kind of inspire people to take charge of their improving their own communication. Yeah. With that, right, the last question on this is how can students be better communicators?
Okay. So I guess a good advice would be you need to be very daring to speak. I think a good start would be, NTU actually organize a lot of networking session. Join all of this and don't be afraid to just ask and actually just talk to people. And when you start to talk to more people, you get comfortable. And when you get more comfortable, you get more confident. That's what I feel. And also, there are actually quite a bit of mentorships out there as well. I think NTU have one. I think currently I'm also a mentor with advisory.sg. Okay. So joining mentorships like those, you get to interact with the wider industry, and some of them are actually quite senior. You have like CEO, CFO stepping up to mentor the young generation. So when you speak to people of seniority, and you step out of your comfort zone, I think you really learn a lot, and it might be very daunting at first, but it's good to make mistakes while it doesn't matter, right? As a student, no one was going to say, oh, your communication is bad or what, but you can just refine your communications along the way, and by the time you start working, you might be a lot better as a better communicator.
Okay. Let's transition into collaboration. Okay. Yeah, it's like kind of a subset of communication, but more specific, right? What is collaboration?
I think for me, collaboration is different teams working together to achieve a common objective. Different teams meaning in our industry is about different discipline, different whether it's engineering or project management. We have different speciality. So they work together and they to achieve a common aim, which is to deliver the project.
What are some broad principles that you keep in mind when collaborating with different teams?
I think the first thing to note is at the start of any project or collaboration that there needs to be a sort of alignment between all the different discipline as well. So I guess all of us, we kind of need to come into a room, and whoever is leading the project, they need to kind of let everyone know what is a success, what's the criteria for success, what do we need to do, what is the key point that to take note, so that everyone is on the same page. Like, for example, are we supposed to deliver the project quickly, or are we supposed to deliver it with the least amount of cost? Because these are different things, whether it determines how you actually carry on your work. If you're going to do it the fastest possible time, then there are different ways to approach this project. So everyone from the different discipline has to be on the same page, and I thought that's quite important before you go further.
Could there be a situation where you have agreed on something, but along the way in a project, somehow it gets mixed up, or like people lose sight of that common objective?
It happens a lot, especially some of our projects actually 5 to 10 years long. So people come, people go, and actually people progress along the project as well. So there's a lot of changes that happen in a project. So every now and then we kind of need to have like a project review sort of session. We do it for us. We do it every month, so that we keep aligned with everyone to kind of inform them of the big picture. So where are we in this project now? So there are projects that are very big that involve maybe 1,000 over people across different country, different time zone. There are also projects that are really small. Just 2 person can manage the whole project. So depending on the scale of the project, the way to do it is different. So for a very, very big project, normally what happens is the senior leadership of that project will have sort of like a monthly town hall session. They'll be talking about where are we in this project, what are we doing well, what are we not doing well, what's the focus during this period, so everyone's on the same page. At the same time, there's also a Q&A with the senior team as well.
Yeah, I think applying back to listeners' context is if you're in a group project, for example, even in a work internship with a small team, it helps to have courage to speak up, like you mentioned earlier, and also clarify common objectives along the way. Because I feel that people will lose sight sometimes, and it's important to remind them of, hey, create a buy-in that everyone can agree to before we move on. What else, apart from having a common goal? Is there any other thing that you find that helps?
So I think I mentioned this when we were doing communications as well, which is you need to understand people's culture and their norms as well. So some of the projects we collaborate is with people from different time zone and different culture, basically the Asians versus the Westerns. Not really versus, but the difference in mindset. So understanding how your colleague will perceive some of the comments that you're going to give is quite important as well. So for example, in a Asian context, it's quite hierarchical. So if you have something that you want to voice your concern over something, you can't just keep the chain of command. You have to go to the immediate boss and escalate up if there's a bigger issue. But for the Western side, it's more of a flat culture. So everyone you can just reach to the head of the team if you feel that something is not right somewhere. So I think in that sense, if you are aware of the different culture and how they work, you will tend to collaborate better, because people will receive you better, and when they receive you better, things actually move on easier.
Just be likable lah. I feel like this topic in itself, how to be likable is important. Some people just think like, oh, it's just about me, and that's self-entitlement mentality. Like, why should I care about what you think? I think we have to apply that in context, right? I think it's important that we don't crave validation, but at the same time also recognize that in a big environment, a working environment, it really isn't just about you. That's why the essence of collaboration is. It's not just about you. It is multiple people with multiple ideas, perceptions, beliefs, cultures coming together to achieve a common goal. Let's try and apply to the students' context. They're listening to this, right? Do you have any practices you have for them that can almost immediately help them be a better collaborator?
I think instead of thinking about what is good for you, I think you should go one step further and think about what is good for the whole team. I think that's quite important, because a lot of time everyone have this one. I mean, it's common as human. What's in it for me? But I think sometimes you need to think about what's in it for you and me, which is the wider team. And if it means getting dirty or doing a task that's not as desirable or glorious. So just do it, because end of the day it's about finishing the whole project or whole objective that your team is trying to do.
Yeah. And knowing that the end outcome is something that you also benefits you if, let's say, you handle this. And also, I like to add that when you demonstrate and set an example, more often than not, like, human beings mirror each other, and they also are willing to do things out of their comfort zone, and that helps the entire team's morale. And because if not, everybody's like, hey, how come nobody's doing it? I also don't do this. Everybody ends up slacking. Yeah. So, okay, wow, I think that's a very good conclusion to our discussion. Succinct and hopefully effective for people. Before we end, I think we just have 5 quick fire questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is just short answer questions. No need to be super short. You can elaborate a bit. Okay, what is the biggest value or lesson you gained from university?
I think the biggest lesson I gained in NTU is basically how to work with different people. I think that's quite important. We deal with so many different kind of people, different course, different faculty, whether is it in your own hall or is it in your studies. Yeah, so I think that is one of my biggest.
Okay. What is your biggest failure in your work career, and how do you overcome it?
Me being too outspoken sometimes, and it might drown off like colleagues who are softer, who are I would say introvert in some sense. So it's something that I also find it. I'm trying my best to. So I give a lot of people airtime. So I always, which is why I always emphasize on active listening.
Right.
It might be a bit daunting sometimes if people talk to me and like a bit loud, a bit confident. Then I better not say so much. Later I kind of slam back or something like that.
I think by nature you have a resonant voice. That's why it might appear that way. But I don't feel that. I feel it comes from a good place, lah. So I don't think. Okay. What is one blunt but useful advice you've got in life?
Okay, so I think that would be very, very thick-skinned.
Okay.
Yep, I think don't be afraid of failure, and also don't be afraid of rejection. I think that is something as a student we always have in our back of our mind. But then again, because we are students, we should take advantage of that, because no one's going to blame a student for failing because we're just starting out in our career. So you'll be surprised what you get just by being blunt, being thick-skinned, and at the same time daring to ask the right questions. Yeah.
Okay. What is one quote or philosophy you live by that inspires you?
The quote that kind of inspires me is the most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said.
Elaborate beyond that.
So I think it's like communication isn't about what is being spoken. So a lot of times through people's non-verbal cues is where you pick up a lot of information on where people are headed to or what are they thinking. So I think that's quite important. And that I always keep that in mind when I speak to people as well.
Sure. Last question. Do you have any final message or advice for NTU students?
So I think NTU now has really a lot of service, a lot of networking session that we probably didn't realize the importance of it back when we were in school. So now all of this stuff that you guys enjoy for free, it costs a lot of money in the real world. A networking session, people are paying $200, $300 just to speak to each other. And you guys have it, a lot of this session that's being organized by CAO and all. I think this is something that I also didn't do, which is to network with as many friends as you can, because down the road you might need each other's help. When you're in your career, like say for example, I'm doing engineering, I might need some help from Kevin, for example. I need a podcast to be done for my engineering project. I know I can look for him, that sort of thing, Yeah, so these are things that we, in school it's always about result, finding a dream job and, competing with your course mates and all. But I think more than that, you shouldn't see your course mates as competitors, but more of like potential friends or potential clients that you might actually even meet in the future. And it's good to keep your network open, because you never know when they need you or you need them. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great ending. Thank you so much, Jacon, for this time, your sincerity and the way you communicated. I definitely got a lot of your communication across, so it's great. I think before we wrap up, this is actually the second last episode. I hope you have enjoyed the previous episodes. If you haven't, check that out on CEO's YouTube channel. If not, you can subscribe and wait for the last episode. Any feedback for us, leave in the comments or connect directly with CAO. And with that, we do wish you all the best. Take care, and we'll see you. Bye.